Hi, my name is Mary Lou Hermann, and I would like to give my testimony about how Jesus has stepped in for me. In 1972, I was 24 years old, and I was a young married woman going to nursing school, and I had to take care of my husband's laundry. So I had washed a lot of clothes. He had a lot of ball uniforms. And I had a 7 o'clock class in the morning. And I was up late reading and studying. And we only had one car. So he had taken the car and he had gone out drinking. So I was in the living room sitting there with my books when he came home. But he didn't notice me. I was sitting back in the corner. So he put the keys on the stand by the door, and he went up to bed, and I took the keys, and I took every bag of laundry that I had washed because I wanted it to dry before the morning. And so he didn't know I was gone. The all-night laundromat was about maybe less than 10 blocks away. You know, you go down one street, turn down another street, turn down another street. But it was on the main street of the town, and this was New Brighton. I grew up in Beaver Falls, but when I was married, we had an apartment for a while on Hunky Alley. And so I parked my little Volkswagen in front of the laundromat, and I went in, and there was a young couple there from the country, and they had every dryer full of their stuff. And so they said, well, we thought nobody would come here in the middle of the night. And I said, yeah, I thought nobody would come in the middle of the night. So I had to wait till they took everything out of the dryers. And so I was standing back in the back of the laundromat, and they grabbed all their things and started going out the front. So I was putting things into the dryers that were in the back. And there was a row of dryers on the left, and there was a row of washers in the middle. And then there was a way to walk over here, an aisle, and then there was this aisle over here. And there was tables in the back where I was folding clothes as they dried. And there was a little bathroom to the left of this table where I was folding clothes. So when that couple left, they were emptying dryers out that were up front. And so there was a time period where they were still up there. And I was in the back, using the back dryers. So simultaneously, when they left, this man walked in. And I did get a chance to speak to that lady from the country, like months later. But she told me that she thought he was with me. And I saw somebody standing up front by the cigarette machine. And I just thought, well, he was with them, or he just was going to get cigarettes. So I'm in the back, and I'm folding clothes. And he walked up towards me from the front, and he had a pair of black socks in his hand. He said, "Are these yours?" And I said, "No." And so I saw his eyes were red. And then he went into the bathroom, which was right there. And I thought, I have to get out of here, And I wasn't a Christian at the time, and I wasn't listening to the Holy Spirit give me any guidance. But I had when the animals are in the forest and the fire comes, that they know, they have an instinct. So I had this instinct that I better get out of there. So I left my good red leather coat there, and I grabbed a couple towels, and I walked on the other side of the washers, away from that wall where the dryers were. So I'm walking out, and then I realized with my peripheral vision that he came out of the bathroom, and he's walking towards the front. Well, I didn't give it a thought. I didn't even think about what he was doing. I just kept on walking. So I got out to the front and I put my clothes into the passenger side for some reason. And then I began to walk around the front of the Volkswagen to get into the driver's side. So when I walked around the front of the Volkswagen, he was standing in the place where the door opened into the laundromat. He was standing right there. And he reached out his hand like this, and he said, "Come with me." Well, he was like, I don't know, 10 feet away from me, the sidewalk and then the door of the laundromat. And I just screamed and I said no, and I ran out into the middle of the street. So this was a 4-lane, but it was in a little town, and so it's not a big highway. And on different sides of the street, you know, people have apartments above the pizza shop or above the bar, there's apartments. So somebody heard me screaming. And these are things I found out later, but somebody called the police. But the police didn't arrive yet. So I ran into the middle of the street and I'm screaming, and he ran after me. So he had on like a mustard colored jacket, corduroy, I think. And he was like a Puerto Rican nationality. So, and he was short. He wasn't much taller than me. And so all of a sudden, I'm in this fist fight, and his jacket was up over my head, not covering my face, but it was going up like this. And I felt something in my neck like this. And I knew he had a weapon. I didn't know what it was. And so I fell into this black hole. So this is the part that is the supernatural part, where when a person is dying and they almost die. Well, anyhow, all these things that I'm going to tell you next were happening all simultaneously in the same period of moments, and it wasn't very long. I started to tumble down in this black hole, and I did not see a light at the end of the tunnel. And I was yelling out from inside of me these words. I said, "Help me, help me." It was like it was like the voice of a little child, but it was coming up from way. I felt it. It just came up from my belly, and it was coming out of me. And I was falling in this black tunnel, and I could see over this way there was a semi-truck that was coming down the road from the back, coming this way. And so also I was already lifted out of my body, and I was up in the sky looking down at everything. So when this man saw the truck, he ran away. Or if the truck hadn't been there, he would have probably stabbed me more times. So he ran off. So the truck driver drove up to the red light, and he got his truck in gear, because, you know, trucks, they have like a shifting. And he was stopping really suddenly. So he got out and he came back to see what was happening, because he saw the guy run down the road. And he came back and he found me laying there in my blood. And, well, I should tell you this part. When I was in the dark tunnel, my body was like shaking, or not shaking, but moving in shock. It was shock. And I was skidding, like on my hip. And my hip I was on my hip, and I don't know how to explain it any other way, but if you would really be in a tunnel, there's a distance of a tunnel. It's like when you go into the tunnel, and then there's a distance of the tunnel. And so it ended up that I had moved 10 feet from the spot where I fell. I had moved backwards. And when I was coming up out of the tunnel, the reason I came up is because a large hand as big as my body, 5 feet wide and 6 feet long, was underneath me in a cupped way of cupping my body and holding me and pulling me up this way out of the tunnel. And then when I was out of the tunnel, my eyes focused, and the truck driver was right beside me. I think he was holding my hand, and the part that was up there was down here inside of me again. And so the truck driver said, "Was that your husband?" I said, "No." And he said, "Well, did you know that person?" I said, "No, I did not know that person." And so he said, "Do you want me to go call an ambulance?" And I was so terrified. And I just said, "No, just hold my hand, hold my hand." So, later on, months later, I found out that somebody in one of the apartments called the police. So the police arrived shortly thereafter, just like in a couple minutes. So they also asked me, "Was that your husband?" I said, "No." And they asked, did I know the person? I said, "No." So I did tell them, though, that I thought he ran down to the left over New Brighton's Main Street is 3rd Avenue. So in my vision, as I was awakened coming out of the tunnel, I saw him run down to the left towards the river. That would be 1st Avenue. So they called an ambulance. They took me to the local hospital. And as I was laying there in the emergency room, the doctor kept on poking me. And here, what happened was I was paralyzed on my left arm and my left leg. So actually, the doctor was yelling at me, "Can you feel this?" And to me, it was yelling, and I'm very sensitive, but he was yelling. So he wanted me to tell him that I wasn't paralyzed, but I couldn't do that because that's what had happened. So he said, "Well, we're going to send you up to Pittsburgh." And they sent me to Presby, but they didn't put me in a helicopter. They had an ambulance, and the ambulance took me up there. So before I got into the ambulance, they called my husband, but I never saw him come in because later on he told me he was detained out there because they were questioning him if he did it, which I never knew this till years later, but I wondered why didn't he come in there. My sister Shelley came. She was the one that they called, and then she came up to me to the bed and she said, "Oh, Luli," which is my nickname, and she said, "Oh, Luli," and she started to cry. So right away I began to comfort her. I put my hand over her hand. I said, "I'll be all right. I'll be all right." And she said, "Well, I have to call Mama." I said, "Oh, no, don't call her." But what I meant was my mother was very, she would get hysterical over doily falling off a table. And anything that happened in our family, she was hysterical, so we didn't tell her things. So I said, "Just tell her that something happened, and you'll talk to her about it later, and that I'm in the hospital, and they're taking me to Pittsburgh." So I did. They did take me in the ambulance, and I remember I was really horrified because the little cot that they have in the ambulance is very narrow, and I'm not a big person, but it was so narrow that my arms were like straight like this, and they were driving very fast, and it was at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, so there wasn't a lot of traffic through going up 65 up to North Side and past Swickley and, Ambridge and all those places. And so they were turning corners somewhere, though, or they were either jerking the ambulance around, because I felt like I was going to fall off of the cot. And that's all I remember about that ride. I felt like I was going to fall off. And so they got me to the hospital. And they took me in. And the first person I saw, I think, was a doctor. And he did something that I'll never forget. He was like holding my neck and my head, because I was stabbed in the back of the neck. So just that human touch, that like that, of holding my head still, that was very powerful to help me. And then there were a few more doctors, and the one was German, and he was yelling at me, and he wanted me to tell my story again, and I said, I will not tell you my story. And he said, well, you have to. So I looked up and I took a couple breaths, and I started telling him the story of how it happened, where it happened. And so then I was in another room, and I could hear on the other side of the wall, I could hear them talking. There was a young nurse, and there was the doctor that had put his hands on my head. And she said, I have to let the broadcasters know what happened. And she was crying. And she said, I have to let them know what's her condition. And he said critical. So I knew that. But somehow I didn't feel it inside. I never really felt like I was a goner. I never did. So anyhow, they took me in to operate, and it was a 6-hour operation. And towards the end of it, the doctor came out. My mother was there at that time in the waiting room. Somebody had gotten her and taken her up there because she didn't drive. So they're in the waiting room, and the doctor came out to her, and he said, if her spinal fluid goes down any further, we're going to lose her, and she's in the hand of God. So I want to back up to the time when I was born. I was born in 1948, and in my mother's pregnancy, she knew that she had an affair, and she was pregnant out of wedlock, but she was also married, and the man she had an affair with was married. So she was having a lot of issues with this pregnancy, but I know that she really wanted the baby. She wanted me to be born. But I think she really was like embarrassed and afraid, and so she had to tell the family that she was pregnant. So my dad, that lived in the house, told his mother. So she came over one day, and she was yelling at my mother. My mother was laying down on the couch resting, and my grandmother came in, and she was pointing the finger and yelling very loudly and accusing my mother of something, because she didn't believe that my father in the house was the father of the baby, because my mother and father hadn't been having relations. So a mother knows these things. And so whenever that happened, my grandmother left, but my mother was in a jolted, hysterical time, feeling, her feelings of, I'm pregnant, now what? Now what's going to happen? And so she said a prayer, but I don't believe my mother was born again. But God answers all prayers. He really does. But her prayer was these words: I put this baby in God's hand. So I want you to remember, I was in God's hand. And the surgeon said I was in God's hand. And when I was on the street going down in the tunnel, I was in God's hand. So all through my life, I was not slow in my intelligence, but I had like, I don't know, probably a dizzy blonde attitude, you know, the kind of personality a dizzy blonde has, but I wasn't blonde, I was brunette. I just was sort of an innocent kid, and I didn't focus on danger around me. You know, I didn't realize where there was danger, and I just had an innocent way of looking at life, and it just didn't dawn on me that somebody would try to hurt me that bad. So after the time in the hospital, I was in the hospital 10 days. I had to wear the halo and the brace and all that. And in my recovery time in the hospital, I don't remember any person in my family coming to see me. 2 girls from high school came to see me. I don't remember my brothers and sisters sending cards. Nobody did. I'm not sure how that all transpired, but later on, my cousins from Ohio told me that they never knew it happened to me till 20 years later after it happened. So I think my mother started like a secret thing where she wanted to keep it a secret. So that was her MO. She always wanted to keep secrets. And so anyhow, I was hurt and rejected that people didn't come. But after I got home, then my mom and dad, the dad that lived in the house, his name was John and her name was Anna. And we were supposed to call her Mama, and he was Daddy. So Mama and Daddy took me in the car to visit this truck driver. And he lived in Midland. So that was about 5 towns away from where we lived. And we took the road trip that day. And he was a very clean-cut man. He was married. He lived in a nice home. And so we went in and we sat there talking to him, and he was glad to see that I had survived it. And then he told us his part in it. He said that he was home that night, early morning, and he had never left his home a day late on any of his runs, ever. He was never late, but he was ready to go. He was puttering around, and his wife said, "What's the matter? Why aren't you leaving?" He said, "I don't know." So I told him, I said, "You are my guardian angel." So later on, about a year later, I had like a Christmas party for my whole family and relatives, and I invited him to come, and he came. But after that, I didn't hear from him, and he didn't hear from me. I'm pretty sure we wrote a thank you. It was from my mom and dad and me. And so, remember, I think I told you I was an atheist. If I hadn't said that yet, I was an atheist. And I would tell the story to people occasionally, and they would say, "Well, that hand that pulled you out of the tunnel, that was God." And I would say, "Well, yeah, that was God." But then I went on with my life. I didn't make any commitment to the Lord or anything. So I guess you could call me an atheist, but I wasn't really practicing anything in that direction either. So then I was trying to keep my marriage together. But the way that my husband handled it, he wanted to distract himself and totally ignore it. So him and I didn't really get to talk about it. He distracted himself by buying a restaurant. And then he was going to have somebody else run it. And I said, so you're going to put your name on it. It's going to be your name. And because I'm married to you, it's going to be our name. And you're letting this other lady run it. I said, I don't think so. And I usually didn't stand up to him on anything, but I did on that. And I said, no, I'll run it. So I started taking care of the restaurant. And I thought that I was well, because I had another job as a nurse's aide before that. I went to nurse's aide training, and then I worked in the hospital with geriatrics. So this must have been a whole year later. I can't remember all the chronological order of the dates. So anyhow, I did start running the restaurant, but I was only 24. So there couldn't have been, I don't think I had a birthday yet, again, after that. This event that happened to me was in October. It was October 22nd, 1972. My birthday is in October 5th, 1948. So 4 years after the stabbing, I was divorced from my young husband because we just couldn't relate to each other. I did start the restaurant up, but then my emotions and things were never settled down from the time that I was stabbed, and my marriage wasn't going well, so I left. So I guess the divorce hadn't happened yet. We were separated. So I left, and so it was 1976. So that was 4 years. So I was working at a restaurant out by the airport, Moon Township, at Sheraton Inn. And I was also working at a bar in Dormont. So when you're young like that, you're in your 20s, you just fill up your life with jobs and work, and one shift in the morning, one shift in the afternoon, one shift in the evening. And that's what I was doing. And so my body was running on some kind of strength and power. It must have been God, because my arm and leg had come back to almost normal. I still just have a little bit of a residual paralysis in my fingers. Like if I go to grab my keys in the bottom of my purse, I can't feel them. But the arm and the leg came back. I'd say 90%. There's 10% where sometimes when I walk, I'm lopsided, or sometimes I can't, this leg is weaker. So I just learned to cope with it. I compensated. And the year after I was stabbed, I was a waitress, and I carried the large trays on my left side. I would put the large, long tray with the 8 dinners on it with lids on it. And so I'm holding the tray, and this other hand is bracing it, walking through the dining rooms back and forth. And when you get over to the stand where you put the tray down, you keep your posture straight, you bend straight down. And while you're doing that, your body's going down to where the table is, and you shift it over. And that's how you put the tray on the table. So I actually did that for 12 years. But in and out of the years, there was things happening. So the next tragedy is going to be on the next video. Watch and see.